this lesson, we're going to go a step beyond the basics introduced in Lesson 1 and enter the exciting world of triads. We'll begin with major triads and discuss what they are and how to figure them out in every key. We'll also take a single major triad and discover how easy it is to find it all over the guitar. We'll talk about what it looks like in root position and in the first and second inversions, and we'll discover super cool voicings and chord shapes you can use to help your chord playing sound fresh and interesting. And by the time we're done with our study, you'll have in your toolbox the ability to find hundreds of chord forms all over the fretboard. I mean, it sounds pretty cool, right? It is. Let me show you. Because a chord is 3 or more different notes played simultaneously, the triad is the most basic chord you can play. Now, I know you can play the first and the fifth, and it could be called a 5 chord or a power chord, so I suppose 2 notes in the right context can be called a chord. Otherwise, it's really just harmony. Appealing to all contexts, then, a triad is the most basic chord. To form triads, take each note of a scale and stack 2 intervals of a third on that note by skipping a note, adding a note, skipping a note, adding a note. We're going to do that with arguably the most important scale in Western music, the major scale. Now, as a quick reminder, an interval is simply the distance between 2 notes. Now, by skipping a note, we're adding an interval of a third, and we do that 2 times to get our 3 notes, our triad. Also, when an interval of a third is 4 semitones or 4 half steps in distance, you get a major third interval. When an interval of a third is 3 semitones or 3 half steps in distance, you get a minor third interval. That means when you are creating triads by stacking thirds, there are 4 possible combinations you can get from these 2 intervals. Major third plus minor third equals a major chord. Minor third plus major third equals a minor chord. Minor third plus minor third equals a diminished chord. Major third plus major third equals an augmented chord. All right, let's quickly do this with the C major scale. Here then are the notes in each triad in the C major scale and how we get them with our skip a note, add a note, skip a note, add a note formula. For more detail on this, check out my video on music theory for beginners applied to the guitar, and I'll put a link in the description. Now, here is something important to memorize. The triads of any major scale are always the following: major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. This will never change for the major scale in any key. Okay, let's take the first triad in the C major scale, which is a C major. And by using what's called scale degrees, the first note is the root, the second note is the third, and the third note is the fifth. In a C major, C is the root, E is the third, and G is the fifth. Now, anytime you find this triad where the C note is the lowest note, that's called the root position. However, you can change the position of these notes in a chord, and this is called an inversion. If we find a C major triad where the third or the note E is the lowest note, this is called a first inversion. And if we find a C major triad where the fifth or the G is the lowest note, this is called a second inversion. To really progress as a guitarist, you should know as many usable triads on the guitar fretboard as you can. And I'm going to show you how to do that with the C major triad. First, let's look at the guitar fretboard where we can see every C, every E, and every G note. Since playing 3 different notes requires playing 3 strings, that means we can find different triads with the lowest note on the 6th string, the 5th string, the 4th string, and the 3rd string. So we're going to do that with all 3 chords, the root position, the first inversion, and the second inversion. And just to keep the video from being way too long, we'll try to find 1 or 2 examples of each. Okay, let's start with the root position chords. Now, starting with the 6th string, we must first find the note C, and it's on the 8th fret. Now, all we have to do is find different forms that have either C, E, G or C, G, E. It doesn't matter what the order is, as long as C is the lowest note. That's what makes that triad in the root position. So here's one example. notice how those notes are all on strings that neighbor one another. And actually, if I was to go through the C major scale, there's the octave. You can see that all those notes were in or within this one octave. That is called a closed or close position. Now if I find another major triad, C major triad, with the root on the 6th string and it's a root position, I can do something like this. Now if you take a look at this chord, it sounded different, but also if I go through the C major scale, here's my 5th, there's the octave, and now I've repeated the 3rd way up here. It is greater than the octave or outside this initial octave of notes. That then is called an open chord position. You can hear how they sound different, although they're the same notes. This one is a little bit more dense and tight, and it does have its purpose in playing guitar. This one, on the other hand, is wider and bright and light. It's almost pretty. Maybe you might want to call it pretty. The idea is they both have their purpose when you're playing guitar. So it's good to know as many different chord forms when you're forming these different voicings. Okay, before we go any further, let's take a quick moment to learn a couple more terms. The actual arrangement of notes in a chord is called a chord voicing. And in the 2 chords we just played, the C major in the root position on the 6th string, one voicing was closed and one voicing was open, as we defined just a moment ago. A second term to bring up in relation to chords is a chord form. And a chord form is the actual shape of the chord. Now, as we'll see shortly, it's possible to have 2 chords with exactly the same voicing and yet have 2 different chord forms or chord shapes. Okay, let's get back to finding the C major triad in the root position, but let's go ahead and find 1 or 2 more where the root is on the 5th string, 4th string, and 3rd string. So let's go to the 5th string. First we've got to find the C note because that's our root. Well, the C note on the 5th string is here. All we need to do now is find E's and G's, the 3rd and the 5th, in any order. So here is a C, here's an E, and here's a G. There's one example that we can use. Or if we go to the right of this root, sort of do what we did up here, we go to the 5th first, and then put the 3rd way up here. Now listen to this chord, and listen to this chord. Exactly the same notes, exactly the same voicing, but look at the chord form. This one covers 3 frets. This one covers 3 frets, but now this is not here, it's here. That's an example of how a chord voicing could be exactly the same, but the chord form is different. So keep those distinctions in mind as we go forward. All right, we found 2 on the 5th string. Let's go to the 4th string. Where do we find a C on the 4th string? Well, way up here. Okay. All right, here is an example of a C major triad. There you go. It's another closed voicing. And how about this one? That's pretty, isn't it? It's another open voicing. All right, let's go to our 3rd string. The 3rd string, where is the C note? Well, a C note is right here. And here is a voicing, C, E, G. Okay, or that's 1, 3, 5. That's a good C major triad in the root position starting on the 3rd string. What would be another way we could do that if we say switched the E and the G? Let's put the G on the 2nd string. That would be there. See that? But the E would be really tough. That's like what, a 7 or 8 note? Yeah, it's an 8 fret stretch. Impractical chord, but this E is also open, so you could do this. But now let's go to the first inversion. The first inversion, you remember, is the C major triad, but now with E, or the third, as the lowest note. By the way, when you notate that in music notation, you would write that as C/E, and that means C with an E bass, or C over E. Look at it like a fraction, and that's how you'll notice a C over E. C with an E bass. Okay, so now we've got the first inversion. Let's find on the 6th string, where is the note E? Well, that is the name of the 6th string, E. So we'll use this one. I guess I could use the octave, but we'll just use the open E. All I need is a C and a G. Well, here's a C, and here's a G. That is a C major triad with an E bass, or a C over E. How else can I do that? Well, I can take this open G and play it here, so I could do it like this. That's an option. And there's many more. Let's just look at those two. Let's go to the 5th string now. Where is the E on the 5th string? Well, an E is right here. All right, so what can I do? Well, we can go like this. There you go. Okay, now we have a C over E. This is the first inversion chord, where we have the 3rd, the 5th, and the root. We could also do it kind of going this way with a really cool chord. That would also be a C major triad, where the E is the bass, or the E is the lowest note. I like this chord. It's a pretty cool chord. It's hard with my little finger. My little finger's not as strong as it should be in my old age, but all right. All right, let's go to the 4th string. And remember, we're doing E as the lowest note, so where's an E on the 4th string? It's right here. So I can do E, G, C. There would be one inversion. Or, and that's the first inversion, that's one form, one voicing. I can take this G note and move it up to here and skip the 3rd string and go. That would be another one. I can take this, let's see. Okay, so I can take the C note from here and put it here, and then play that G note, so you can do it like this. That's an option. That's sort of like that one we just played on the 5th string. So 3 different positions there, which is kind of cool. 3 different chord forms. All right, let's go to the 3rd string. And where would we find an E note on the 3rd string? Well, it's right here. Okay, so we can do where we have the 3rd, the 5th, and the 1st, or the E, the G, and the C. That's a first inversion, C major triad, or C over E. Pretty cool. Now if we're going to change that around and put the G on the 1st string and the C on the 2nd string, so we can come up with a different form, we could do this. Kind of a tough chord. Maybe impractical, but that's another option. Okay, so we found 9 different chords on using the first inversion. Let's quickly go to the 2nd inversion, and that's where you have a C over G, because the 5th is now the lowest note. That means C with a G bass. Okay, so where is a G on the 6th string? We'll just go through the same process again. There it is. So I can find a C here and an E here. There is a 2nd inversion C major triad with the root on the 6th string now, the G on the 6th string. Another option that we can do is, say we take this G, maybe this E again, but now take our C and put it up an octave. That's an option, and there's many others. So there's two options of the second inversion C major triad, with the G as the lowest note on the 6th string. Let's find it on the 5th string. So our G is here. We can add the C here and then the E, or the 1st and the 3rd. And there's an example of the second inversion with the lowest note on the 5th string. You know, we can take this C and move it up here and have this. That's an inversion, or that's a form of the second inversion, or open voicing. Pretty cool. Let's go quickly to the 4th string. And where can we find a G on the 4th string? Well, the G is right here. Okay, so I can do a G, I can do a C, and an E. That's a real famous C chord, C major triad. This is a C over G though, because the G is the lowest note. And then what else could I do? Well, I can take this C and I can move it here, so I can do this. That's an option. Where I have a G, E, and C. So there's another, that's an open voicing of a C over G, a C chord or C major triad in the second inversion with a root on the 4th string. And let's go to the 3rd string. So where is a G on the 3rd string? Here it is. It's open G. I can add a C and an E. Pretty cool. Or I can switch the C and the E and put the E on the 2nd string and the C on the 1st string, and then add this G. There's another one. So if you think about it, we found 8 chords in this root position, 9 chords I think in the first inversion, another 8 in the second inversion. That's 25 chords, which is pretty cool. You just added potentially 25 chords to your chord vocabulary if you didn't know any of those. And that's just taking the C major triad in its root position, first inversion and second inversion all over the fretboard, and just finding a couple different examples of each. There are many, many more. Okay, let's take our first voicing. Alright, because I know this C is the root, if I move it down here to a B, now I've got a B major triad or a B triad. If I move it down again, I've got a B flat or A sharp triad. And down again, I've got an A triad or an A triad. And then if I go down again, it's an A flat or G sharp triad. Let's take this other voicing that we learned, this one. If we go up, C sharp triad or C sharp major triad, D major triad. How about here? This, the root is now an A major triad, G major triad, F major triad. My point is, as long as I know the root, like, so say for example I did this one. Alright, the root is here. Here's your C. So if I move it up, now I've got a D flat, or I've got a C sharp major triad. There's a D major triad, D sharp or E flat, E major triad, F major triad, on and on. It doesn't matter. Any of those forms, I can find out what, I can play it in any key is the point. So think about it. 25 forms that we learned in doing those, the root position, the first inversion and second inversion. But now I apply that to 12 keys and you have 300 chords. No joke. All you have to do is change the root. Basically, we just added 300 chords to our vocabulary, and all we did was study the C major triad or the major triad. We've got more to go. But to not make this video too long, we're going to stop here, and then there's going to be a part 2 where we continue our study of the major triads, and we'll look into minor triads, diminished triads, and augmented triads. and then we'll expand upon all that. Triads are awesome, and if you want to improve as a guitarist, you want to get them under your belt. Thanks so much for swinging by and for studying with me today. I hope it's been helpful to you. If you found it helpful, like the video and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. I welcome you back to future videos and check out the ones that we've done in the past. Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.